I'm Logan Crawford, and right now on Spotlight, we're exploring Out Psychotherapy, powerful, paradoxical strategies to reverse dangerousness and resistance in the criminally insane, severely mentally ill, and symptomatic outpatient by Dr. Stephen H. Berman, PhD. Dr. Berman introduces us to the groundbreaking world of paradoxical interventions, offering a fresh perspective on treating some of the most challenging psychiatric cases. Through firsthand experiences with murderers, arsonists, and severely mentally ill patients, the doctor showcases the effectiveness of these unconventional methods in motivating change where traditional therapies have failed. We're delighted to have this very talented doctor join us here today on Spotlight. We thank the team for helping us put him in the spotlight today. And we ask viewers like you to support writers like him by subscribing to our channel and by purchasing his powerful, thought-provoking book. The links are below this interview. Doctor, great to see you here today on Spotlight.
Thank you so much. It's an honor to be on this program with you today.
It's an honor to have you on the show. I've covered murder for a lot of my career as a TV journalist, people who shoot with crossbows and strangle and do all kinds of crazy things. Are people who murder necessarily crazy?
No, not at all. Some people that commit murder, they have it, they're very, very methodic. They plan out what they're doing. They're aware of what they're doing. They know the consequences of what will happen to them if they get caught. Not all people that commit murder are let's say, crazy, schizophrenic,
or clinically
or out of touch with reality.
Exactly. It's very, very interesting. I spoke to a criminal investigator one time, and he said if somebody got me angry at work, I would think about informing the boss, maybe writing a strongly worded letter, perhaps even confronting him and talking to him about it. But he said for a person who thinks about killing is on that list of possible ways to deal with it. So the way people who kill think differently than people who don't, right?
I would say so, generally speaking. However, there's also a continuum, a spectrum of how much a person's anger can go into having thoughts of hurting somebody else. People can go from being passive aggressive to being aggressive to being abusive to another person, verbally or physically. It doesn't have to then go all the way to the point of murder. But there's a subtype of mental disorders that are called personality disorders. And one of them is called the antisocial personality disorder. That doesn't mean it's a person who doesn't want to have anything to do with others. It's more of a criminally minded individual, and they oftentimes have anger that becomes very impulsive and rageful and could end up committing acts of serious harm to others, including murder.
Amazing. It's amazing the spectrum that people fall under, as you mentioned, when it comes to criminal activities and non-criminal activities. And some people will say, given the right circumstances, anybody could do anything. But that's a discussion for another day. Let's talk to you about your paradoxical strategies in psychotherapy. How do they differ from traditional strategies and therapies and approaches?
Well, one thing is the reaction oftentimes of the patient. When I introduce a paradoxical approach, it oftentimes leads to bewilderment, initial confusion, shock, surprise, but also a refreshing reaction within the patient. So these approaches are different in the sense that typically when somebody comes in for therapy, they're assuming the therapist is going to want to have them lower their symptoms. But in a paradoxical approach, and there are many of these, one might be to actually prescribe the symptoms, actually to have the person act out more of what they're already saying that they're experiencing and to intensify that, which even the bewildering look on your face right now, to see that, I can see. And so when somebody does this, they may actually start laughing at themselves, showing more of their symptoms than they're even really feeling. which can also help them to then learn how to decrease them, the ones that are really taking over that seem to be out of their control. So it can actually help a person to liberate from their symptoms.
So is it
And that's,
basically like
yes.
exposure therapy? Like if somebody's afraid to fly a plane, have them fly a plane?
Well, it is a form of exposure. In all the models of therapy, for example, in behavior therapy and implosion therapy, or being exposed desensitization by being exposed to the feared object, the feared stimuli. But this is a little different because we're actually asking the patient to purposely try to enact more of their symptoms, as opposed to just go into a situation that they would normally avoid. Okay. And that's only one example. Another would be to use what are called reframes, shifting the meaning of the actual event or how the person perceives their behavior and how they interpret themselves, and to see it in a completely opposite way. So in the subtitle of my book, I talk about resistance and dealing with dangerousness. So I will shift completely negative behavior to being suddenly seen as cooperative, finding strength within the symptoms. I mean, I can give examples of
Yeah, give me an example. I find it fascinating.
Yeah, okay. So for example, I had a patient that approached me at the elite forensic hospital I was working at. And he said, this man over here, this patient has been following me around for the past couple of weeks. I can't take much more of it. He's calling me names. He's threatening in his speech towards me. I can only take so much. And the other staff have already talked to him. The doctors have spoken to him. Everybody has, and he won't stop. So I decided to bring the two of them together. And of course, this was at 4 o'clock in the afternoon.
Yeah.
On a Friday afternoon, where a lot of times these things occur,
Yeah,
the crises. And so I called the two of them together, and I said to the man who was agitating this other man, I said, and both of them were in for murder, which is very interesting too.
Yeah.
And so I said to the man who was agitating the other one, I said, why are you being such a good friend to him? Why are you trying to help him to get out of the hospital? Why are you? He goes, what do you mean? I don't like him. I don't have any positive thoughts towards him. I go, are you kidding? Look, the thing is that we have to recommend you to the courts as to when you're ready to potentially leave this hospital. And we can't always tell how somebody is going to be functioning on the outside unless we can see how do they handle stress? How do they handle adversity? Here you are doing everything you can to upset him, and he has somehow managed to maintain himself. So we're busy going in and charting in his next court report how well he's handling stress. If you really don't want to be such a good friend to him and not be so helpful to him, then you'd leave him alone. He goes, that's it. I'm not helping him anymore. I'm not going to be his friend anymore. So I have a kernel of the rationality there, but at the same time shifting. That's an extreme shift.
Right. Basically, like you said, it's a reframing of the issue. It's a shift of the issue. It's telling somebody something they don't expect. It's making them look at it from a completely different standpoint. All of which are very, very interesting. Let's give the folks at home an overview of what your book is about.
Yes. The overview of my book is on my career experiences as a frontline psychologist and as a supervising psychologist of other doctors, in terms of many of these cases through the lens, through the psychotherapeutic lens of my eyes, and they join with me and vicariously experience what I was actually dealing with, seeing the patient there in a sense, what them presenting the problem, how I address it in these very unusual ways, in these paradoxical ways. And this has never really been done in working with the criminally insane, or with criminals, people that are acutely dangerous. And these are people, they will see in the book, that so many doctors and other clinicians had tried to help, but were unsuccessful. And the staff themselves were burning out. And they were at a point where they were not necessarily responding in the most therapeutic way with the patient. They had basically given up who are saying, until he wants to change, until he decides to change, there's nothing you can do. Well, I didn't accept that, and I had found that there are ways to help individuals and to do it quickly and get very, very solid results in the short and in the long run. And which was my way of also helping the staff to realize, look, people can get better. Don't forget while you're even here to treat people. We don't have all the answers, but when we do find something new that comes along that could be helpful, let's use it. Let's use it when we can. And so the book is replete with so many examples. I just told you, one right there, but I have several I could tell you with paranoia, people that are chronically in restraints, medical issues, patients that are drinking water gallon by the gallon to the point where they'll go into a coma or die, patients that are starving themselves for weeks on end, to where I was called in as a last resort by the hospital administration, and within a very short period of time, in a half an hour, I was able to get the person to start eating again. With water intoxication, it's an actual condition that 17% of psychiatric patients eventually develop over the course of their history of being inpatients. And so it's a very serious problem. So,
are the criminally insane that you deal with largely suffering from schizophrenia?
yes, the majority of the ones that I work with do suffer from schizophrenia. Some of them also have bipolar disorder, and so which may also have a psychotic component to it. Psychosis or psychotic component is what you see in schizophrenia, where they have impaired judgment, impaired reasoning, they've lost a sense of reality testing, and they may be suffering from hallucinations, all different kinds, like hearing voices telling them to do things. Also paranoid delusions, thinking that they're being persecuted, that people are out to get them. And so there can be all kinds of delusions that they may have. And so medications oftentimes can really affect the hallucinations and decrease those, but they're not always as effective with delusions. And medications have definitely improved over the years. Thank goodness. I mean, it's essential to have the medications that we have. But the patients in this book are some of the most difficult patients one will ever see or read about.
You were dealing with the hardcore, criminally insane, schizophrenics, people who have committed murder, as you mentioned. Are your techniques what you would call novel techniques? Are they basically pioneered by you?
Well, the paradoxical approaches have been around for quite some time, even in the 1800s. Okay, there were some, and there have been some other. There was a psychiatrist, John Rosen, in 1953. 1953 wrote a book called Direct Psychoanalysis, and he would actually do some of these paradoxical approaches. And then in the 70s, 80s, 90s, there was an increase in some of these approaches. But the ways that I've combined them with traditional therapies, the ways that I use them sparingly and use them in a very individualistic way, and use them also in some ways that aren't in books. Yes, they're definitely novel in that sense. And certainly with people using it in treating dangerousness, okay? And doing this as a frontline psychologist, because I was in harm's way when I did a lot of these interventions. But there were other people to witness these and to see how miraculously there could be very quick change. And so I don't know any other books that really feature this.
Amazing. Who is your reader? Is it the true crime reader who wants to find out a little bit more about this side of life and this subculture, if you will? Is it other healthcare professionals, mental health professionals like yourself who could learn from some of the techniques that you employed?
I would say it's really both. First of all, in terms of mental health professionals, psychiatrists, psychologists, social workers, rehabilitation therapists, marriage family therapists, frontline psychiatric nurses, psychiatric technicians, even administrators working in prisons, in hospitals, outpatient programs, people in private practice, people doing family therapy. Because the book offers so many of these techniques that they could adapt also to their particular direction of focus for their treatment. But also, I'm not one to do a lot of psychobabble.
Right.
Okay, so I've really written this for the public as well. So this certainly is for professionals. There's a medical school currently that is starting to use this, and it's also to help doctors in how to deal with extreme resistance. So oftentimes, like I said, I was called in to help with medical problems as well. And so it really runs the whole gamut.
I guess it was the 1970s when large numbers of the mentally ill were deinstitutionalized because of reforms. In your opinion, are there too many people on the street who have schizophrenia, who are in need of treatment? Has America made a mistake? Are we ignoring mental health? Are we ignoring mental illness? Are there dangerous people among us who should be perhaps have a closer eye kept on them?
It's a great question. That we could go on for a whole nother book right there.
Another conversation.
Yes, but
sure.
To say, yes, there are so many people that are on the streets that do have severe mental illness and that do need help and do need care. Many of them have co-occurring disorders like substance use. Sometimes that's just to mask their symptoms. Sometimes if they weren't using, they might be even more dangerous. So there's so many people that are on the streets now, and there is so much mental illness, and really having programs that help them move from a more structured setting of an inpatient ward to gradually to a less structure and being trusted and being able to show that they really want the help that they need. We can't give up on these people, and we do need to do more for so many people in this country, in the world.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree wholeheartedly. Doctor, before we leave you today, anything else you'd like the folks at home to know?
Just that I hope people do read this book and have an open mind, and that it causes them to kind of scratch their heads and kind of in bewilderment and go, wow, there are new things that we can do.
Yeah.
And I think that basically sharing some of these examples, I think is one of the best ways of learning. And these were surprising to me to learn these, because I was trained in all the traditional therapies, and I worked my tail off in graduate school and in learning, and most of what I did was not these techniques. I used these in extreme situations. I was at that hospital, for example, I was put in charge of the rewards and consequences for all patients. And so I rewrote the universal rules for all the patients. And I developed, I'll share this. One thing, I developed a coffee shop with donuts and coffee for them to get. And it was based on their behavior, lots of things that were tied into that. And one of the most gratifying experiences for me was to walk into that hospital each day, past the barbed wire fence, and to see 120 to 140 patients lined up, many in for murder, getting along with each other, chit-chatting, waiting in line patiently for their coffee with not one fight in those 2.5 years.
Amazing. Amazing stories, amazing work. You're a doctor who cuts to the chase, and we like that. The book is fantastic. It's called Out Psychotherapy, Powerful Paradoxical Strategies to Reverse Dangerousness and Resistance in the Criminally Insane, Severely Mentally Ill, and Symptomatic Outpatient. Whether you're a mental health professional or a layperson like myself who happens to have an interest in mental health and criminality, you will find this a fascinating read. Doctor, thank you so much for joining us here today on Spotlight.
Thank you so much, Tim. Thank you.
My pleasure. To the folks at home, I'm Logan Crawford, thanking you for your time this time. Until next time on Spotlight.